Okay, we're into module 1B, which is the second part to Amina's presentation. I'll be talking about histology. So my name is Melanie Peralta. I'm from Mount Sinai Services across the street, lab manager there. But my background is actually medical laboratory technologist, MLT, and I'm licensed in histology. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it's actually quite important because most people don't realize how important it is when you're doing your Visium HD. So we're going to start. Oops.
Yeah, so you're good to go there. Just focus on the screen and use the arrow keys.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. So, okay, here are your learning objectives for today. Basically, we're going to try and understand the histological process to produce a paraffin block or frozen block, be able to select the region of interest, understand how tissue section is mounted for Visium HD onto a slide, know the process for producing a quality slide ready for Visium HD processing, and know how to select your area of interest for Visium HD based on a hemotoxin and eosin stain slide. So I'm going to echo something that was brought up earlier today by Trevor. And he said that really you need to analyze what it is that you're starting with, what tissue you're going to be working with, what are you looking for. So for histology, what you're going to ask yourself is your selection of tissue material. And why is this going to be important? In the next slides, you'll see why. So you're going to ask yourself what organ or target tissue to analyze. So when you're working with tissues, that's what you're looking at. So you need to ask yourself, are the tissues going to be normal tissue, diseased tissue? Where and how are you going to access this tissue? So meaning, is it going to come from fresh tissue, meaning it's from your mouse, you're going to dissect it out, or it's from a human biopsy that's given to you by a biorepository lab, fresh? Or is it going to be archived material? What I mean by archived material, you're going to be accessing a biorepository that has wax blocks of tissue already embedded in blocks. So for those types of tissues, you have to keep in mind, we don't know how they were fixed or processed. So you have to keep that in mind when you're making your design for your project. And then the last but not least, are you working with wet fixed paraffin embedded tissue, what they call FFPE? Or is it going to be fresh frozen tissue, which you will freeze from fresh? So let's consider the following. You want to consider your composition, cellularity, and stability. This is for your tissue. These factors will affect the quality and amount of RNA and DNA within the tissue in order to perform spatial techniques. As you know, you guys are working with RNA when you're using Visium HD. So your RNA quality is actually going to be affected by fixation. So your time and length in fixation is going to matter, and temperature. So let's talk about the basics. So there's only 3 steps actually in achieving a paraffin block. And it sounds simple, but it's actually quite laborious. You're going to be fixing the tissue. You're going to tissue process the tissue, and then you're going to embed it in a wax block ready for sectioning. Each one of these processes actually take about a day or so. Fixation. What is fixation? Well, basically, you're trying to preserve the tissue in a lifelike manner and protect the tissue during tissue processing. Therefore, it's imperative to use appropriate fixatives for your purpose. Now, gold standard in pathology labs is 10% neutral buffered formalin, and it's usually commercially bought and ready to use. Another one that's used widely in research labs is 4% paraformaldehyde. Paraformaldehyde is actually the powder form of formalin, and you make it up to 4%. Now, if you're going to use 4% paraformaldehyde, keep in mind that you can just make this up in water, but most likely it's better to use it with a buffered type of solvent, or not solvent, sorry, solution. But if you want to save time, you can purchase 10% neutral buffered formalin and it's ready to go. And it's usually, like I said, pH neutral. That's the pH that you want to keep it at when you're fixing tissue. Now, there's factors that affect fixation. These are your factors. The size of the tissue should fit into a standard cassette, 2 centimeters by 3 centimeters by 0.5 centimeters. So I'm going to show you the next picture. There it is. So we're going to be talking about, in this case, wet fixed tissue processed into a paraffin block. So in the picture on the left, we have mouse brain tissue and spinal cord. So this is coming from wet fixed tissue. So they're actually fixed and fixative, and they're put into this cassette. This cassette is actually not very big. So if you picture yourself, let's say the size of a nickel, that's what will actually fit in there. So you don't want the tissue pushed all the way to the sides of that actual cassette. You want it kind of free in the cassette, but you don't want it too small either. Because if it's too small, it's going to fall through those holes in the cassette during processing. And I'll show you why in a few minutes here. The amount of fixative is very important. So your volume. The ratio is usually 1 to 20. So you have your tissue and you want 20 times the volume of formalin or fixative. And the reason why you need this is because there's a chemical reaction that happens between the tissue and the fixative. And what they do is they cross-link. And this is why when you're doing spatial, you're getting these breaks in your DNA and RNA that kind of breaks it apart. So that's why your quality degrades as you leave it in fixative too long. So your timing is going to be a factor. So make sure that you have 1 to 20 volume. Because if you don't, you're not going to get these cross linkages and your tissue is not going to be fixed well. And it's going to affect your spatial at the end of it. And you won't know until way later. It's past and you can't go back. So this is very important. Temperature, it's actually best at room temperature. Some people like to put this in fridge. You can do that, but you have to keep in mind that when you put it in the fridge, you have to extend the time. So when you extend the time, you need to kind of figure out which is best for your tissue. And I'll explain this in a moment. And then what's the time? Well, for most use, it's 24 hours. Some people can do maybe 4 hours, but that's usually for biopsies 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter, centimeter in length. And those biopsies too, it depends on the composition of the tissue. So this is what I'm going to touch on now. So as you know, up there, that's brain. Brain is highly lipid compared to, let's say the kidney. Kidney just has a little capsule around it that protects it. But once you cut that open, formalin is going to flow through there freely, no problems. It's going to get in. But brain, because it's lipid, you've got an antagonist with you because water and fat don't really mix. So you need time for it to penetrate into the tissue. So when that happens, your brain actually is going to take longer time to fix than your kidney. So your kidney probably can do it in 24 hours. Brain, you're actually going to take maybe 2 to 5 days, depending on the size of the tissue and depending on the thickness of that tissue. Because remember, it takes 2 hours for 1 millimeter square of tissue to fix. So really, a day is perfect. But if you're not sure, 2 to 3 days is not really going to hurt it too much. When they say overfixing is going to cause a problem, it's usually meaning a month or even 3 weeks or so. But if you've left it in there for about a week, so long as you change that formalin at least twice within that week, you're going to be okay. But if you're going to leave it with very little formalin, now we've got a problem. As you can see at the bottom there, it shows you what not to do in X's. You don't want it. You need to have that formalin surrounding that tissue, and that tissue is actually free in the formalin in order for it to fix. Whether it be in the cassette or whether it just be in the tube, that's what you want. Tissue processing, this is my favorite. This is the only part of histology that's pretty much automated, believe it or not. So that's a tissue processor that you see in the pictures. And it looks like I don't know, I guess it looks like a dishwasher in a way. At the bottom, you have these reagents that will go in and out of an actual chamber. The chamber's on top. That's where you're going to load your tissues. So, of course, that's what that is. And we're going to remember this acronym, WAX. If you remember the word WAX, it's tissue processing in a nutshell. So you've got wet fixed tissue, that's your W, fixative, aqueous, alcohol, graded alcohols, you're going from the most dilute to the most concentrated of alcohols. You're going to go through a series of that. Then into xylene. You need the xylene in order for wax to infiltrate the tissue. And so if you remember wax, that's tissue processing, right in a nutshell for you. So if you remember this, this is actually very important. So if any one of these steps are missed or skipped or not ideal or according to protocol, it's going to affect the tissue and you won't be able to cut your tissue. And you won't be able to get the beautiful pictures that you normally see on Visium HD. So these three need to all be in place. And the reason why you need this is because you need to give your tissue structure. Because as you know, you're coming from wet fixed tissue. It's still soft. A little bit of hardening due to formalin, but in the end, it's still soft and you can't cut it that way. And as you know, water and wax don't mix. So you need something in between to take the water out of the tissue and infiltrate it with wax to give it structure and stability. And the fixative is actually what's going to protect it while it's going through all these series of solvents. And it'll actually go through heat as well. There's a little bit of heat, 37 degrees in this machine. On top of it, you've got pressure and you've got agitation and you've actually got a vacuum to actually put the tissues in that machine, and the tissue will be infiltrated with the liquids on all sides. And it'll be kind of forced into the tissue. So from here, a routine standard size of tissue, which is what I was just telling you in the previous slide, will be processed in about 14 to 18 hours. This is done overnight. So you basically load it before I go home and we come back and it's ready to embed. But that's how long it takes. So if someone comes to me with a tissue and says, oh, I need this by the end of the day, not going to happen. Not going to happen. It actually takes that long if it's properly processed, and you need that process in order for you to cut your tissue. So what happens is after this process, the tissue is going to come out and it's going to be a little bit hard, but slightly pliable. So you can still press on it and you should be able to make a little indent in it. You don't want it too hard because then it's going to give you problems again with cutting, because then you're going to get chattering. These are all artifacts with cutting, which probably you don't really need to know, but it will cause those problems that you see with the folds, the spaces, the cracks in the tissue. So you want to avoid all of that. This is wax embedding. So remember, we were just touching on the brain. You saw the two halves of the brain plus the spinal cord. So that's how it's oriented in the block. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your oriented area face down into that metal mold. And then you're going to fill that up with more wax. And then put the little pink cassette on the side over there where her glove is on top. And then once it cools down, it's going to pop out like jello, and you're going to have your cutting surface right in front of you in a block. You'll see a block shortly once we get through the next slides. Okay, now we've got our block. So this is the fun part that everybody likes to know. It's the sectioning for Visium HD. So as you can see, I have two slides there. One of the slides is actually from 10x Genomics, which is beautifully picture perfect. This is your area of interest. The thing is, you can't take that piece of paper and measure it onto your slide or onto your tissue. So what I do is I take a blank slide and I actually map out that area on my blank slide. So that blank slide is what I'm going to use as a template when I'm picking up the tissue. So when you're choosing your region of interest, now region of interest, you're just picking an area. Usually a pathologist will do this ahead of time on an H&E slide. They'll tell you where the area is that you want to take. And that region is what you're actually going to ensure is within that box. So usually that's done by a pathologist. So now, once you do that, you're going to take a 5-micron section, which is not that thick, and you're going to put that on positively charged slides. Now, 10x Genomics just say you can use a little bit thinner, but gold standard, again, is usually 5 microns. So 4 microns will also work. So I'm not sure what the other thicknesses will do for Visium HD, but I know that this is what we use as a standard when we're cutting for Visium HD. And you can only use positively charged slides. And I stress this because some people use plain slides and their tissues fall off. And then Amina or PGMC won't be able to do their work because it falls off. And then you have to repeat the whole process again. So please make sure you're using charged slides. And then, of course, the slides can be stored at room temperature with a desiccator, but they have to be used within 14 days. Okay? So here it is, choosing your region of area, or sorry, your region of interest. On one picture, you have an H&E slide. You can see it's purple. There's a red circle and a blue circle there, or blue square. So these are the regions, let's just say, is what you're interested in. So the block is right beside it. So that's the block, wax block right beside it. And we've already matched it up as text where we actually match up the slide to the block to see where this region of interest is, because we need to cut this block and we need to match it up according to the specifications of 10x genomics. Well, how are you going to do that? Right now, I don't even have my template. So we're going to go to the next slide. Well, you'll see where we actually do that. So you take the blank slide, you draw the parameters, like I said, and you overlay that blank slide on top of your H&E. So now you can see where those regions of interest are located on that actual template. Once I have that, I'm going to overlay that same template on my block. And when I see that, I can see, okay, the region of interest is there. All I need to make sure is when I cut it, it's within that same region. So when I'm sectioning this, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that that's actually within that black box. If it's not, it's going to fail again when it gets to the processing for Visium HD. Nope. So I'm going to show you a video. It's just quick. It's about 2 minutes of how they mount sections onto a slide. Has anyone ever seen that? Some of you? No? But some of this will be kind of, oops. Will it even work? Ania, I can't get the video to work on the, sorry.
All right.
I'm like, where's the play button?
So it's not working here, but that's all right. We will.
Oh, I just got it.
I'm gonna copy that. Yeah, no, it's unfortunately not a link in itself. So that's all right. That's an easy fix. We're just going to. Actually visible to the people online. Deal with the ads.
Oh, yeah, sorry about the ads. There were ads before.
Sorry, don't sign up for any AI web classes that are advertised to you. Let me just make sure that this is sharing to the folks online.
Thank you, Nia.
Of course.
As you can see, it's not as easy as it is. The tissue often will float away from you. Good afternoon.
Gotta love autoplay. This is yours.
Yep.
Of course. You'll just have to scroll through until you find your slide here. But good.
Okay. So now you know how tissue sectioning is done and how it's actually floated. That's called floating onto a water mat. So once you have that, now just imagine these tissues are in this water. You're trying to put this in this box that's not very big. It's quite small. And you want to make sure that that region of interest, there was two of them, are within that box. So try to align that within that area prior to you taking it to wherever you need to take it for Visium HD is actually quite laborious. Because if you have many blocks to do, which most people don't, usually it's only one or two for Visium HD because it is quite expensive, but you want to make sure it's bang on. And you got to ensure the following as well. You got to make sure that there's no rips, tears, or breaks in the tissue. So the top picture, those are actually processing issues. So as soon as it touches the water bath, it'll actually expand and explode. The tissue will literally explode, like it'll just break apart and you can't pick up anything. So this is why I was saying that fixation is extremely important. Next to that would be your tissue processor. Those two steps together, if they're not done properly, you're not going to get a good section and you're not going to get very good ring scores either for your DV. And you're not going to get a Visium HD for sure. It's going to look like garbage, exactly what it is. Garbage in, garbage is going to come out. The next one are the sections with folds and are compressed. What I mean by compressed is usually with very cellular tissues, tumors, liver does this, lung does this. When you're cutting them, the tissues will actually compress on each other. So you know how when you're looking at the video of the person cutting, this beautiful ribbon coming out, you'll actually get them all scrunched up. And you can float that out all you want and you're going to get wrinkles no matter what you do. So again, that needs to be done properly. There are ways around that. Us in histology have all the tricks and methods to try and get that out for you. So I highly recommend using a histology lab when you're asking for your sections. And then the next, someone was talking about bone in the area earlier. This is an example of calcified tissue with bone. And it looks exactly like that when it comes off the microtome. When that happens, that means the tissue is actually either not decalcified or they never knew that there was calcifications in the tissue as you get deeper into the block. Because when you go deeper into the block, you have to remember with diagnostic blocks, they've already been cut previously. So now I'm going to be the second person cutting it. And then I go in, I'm like, what's this? And normally what you'll find are the weirdest things: staples, sutures, my favorite, calcium block, like calcium in the block. And this is actually extremely difficult to get out once it's been processed. Decalcifying a block needs to be done prior to fixation. So basically, or sorry, during fixation, you'll fix it first and then you'll decal the block. And usually decal, they use EDTA. I do not recommend at all formic acid or HCl. Any of those, don't use it because it will ruin your RNA. So you need to use something gentler for breaking up that calcium. So EDTA is usually gold standard, even for IHC. So it will also work for your Visium, but you just have to keep in mind the length of time. Because if that is a very, very calcified block, I would suggest not using it at all and choosing another block or another piece of tissue if you have any. So I recommend that. So these are what you need to avoid. So now what happens? So I cut this section. Okay, we got it within the box. So we're going to look at the ones with the frosted ends, not the ones where the green check mark is. We're going to look at the other two. So your region of interest, we already chose it. It's there. Your H&E, you can see it. Now, you cannot pick, for Visium HD, you can only choose one region of area per slide, not two. Everyone thinks, oh, if I put two sections, I can have both of these. No, no, no. One section, one slide, one region of interest. You can't have both on one slide. So in this case, I would cut this on two separate slides. One being at the bottom, as you can see, and the other one being at the top. So those are your two slides, and then Amina will do what she needs to do, or PGMC, and they'll take that area and do their Visium analysis on it. And how do they do this? Why is it so important to be in that black box? Well, the bottom picture says it all. So these are the cartridges that she was talking about earlier when she was showing you the video. That's what they are. So in this picture, the black little box that you see in the middle, that can only move up and down by so many millimeters. So it needs to be in that black box that you see there, that they put on the slide or wrap the slide in. Not really sure how they do it, but that's what's necessary in order to get your Visium onto their platform. And I'll show you the next picture. This is the same thing that I think Amina kind of showed earlier, but this is just showing how you need that section to be in that template that I had, and now into this little black box, 6 millimeters, or 6 millimeters by 6 millimeters. It's not very big. So this is all what it takes to get it onto for Visium assessment and analyzing. So notes to consider. TMAs. I know most of you goes, oh, let's maximize it. Let's get a TMA on there. It's not going to work because, well, you could get it to work, but with great manipulation. It's actually best to just use whole tissues if you can, because with TMAs, the problem is we don't know the type of tissue, and sometimes it's varied. Maybe you'll have a piece of liver in there, you'll have a piece of kidney, you'll have some brain, maybe you'll have some skin, maybe some gut. I would guarantee you that out of that list I mentioned to you, 3 of them are going to lift. And if you have that all for Visium, you're going to lose all that data because it lifted. And all you have left is like one piece of tissue. So do you proceed with Visium HD or do you not? So these are things you're going to come into problems with. So I highly suggest just don't do the tissue microarray arrangement. Xenium, possible, but Visium HD, I would not do it. So now what I was talking about, your areas of interest. So now, when you guys bring your slide to Amina, they're going to do an H&E again on that slide that you brought in. And on that, you're going to circle your area of interest. So earlier was just a region. Region is just you're looking at it, and it's like it's generally in this area what you want. Now it's the area of interest, what you actually want to look at. So when you bring that in, and like I said, if you have 2 areas on one block, it has to go across 2 slides. If you have 2 blocks, one on one, one on another, that will be one section on one slide and another section on another slide. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your Visium HD. All right, any questions on the paraffin embedding or paraffin wax block type for Visium? I'm going to move on to frozen after. Oh, can you go to?
So with the wax, do you use fresh wax every time you're switching to an RNA, like an RNase free sample?
Yeah, so when we're doing the molds, there's actually a big wax dispenser. And that dispenser's never been, like, no one touches it. It's just you put wax in there and it's covered. And we use fresh wax each time we make a block.
And so then we just need to specify that when we are putting in the order request form that we're.
No, it's part of it already automatically. Yeah.
Thank you.
But you would put that you need RNA, DNA free sectioning. So then we will prep the whole entire, or just say Visium or 10x genomics. Most people will know that in majority of labs. I don't know if diagnostic labs would know that, but the research labs may, like where I'm working now at Mount Sinai, they know that, as well as another core facility here, which is called Pathology Research Program. They will know that. So you put that on it and people will know. So.
Someone just said, can you explain in more detail why TMAs would not work with Visium HD?
It's not that it won't work, it's just that you're going to run into more problems. So remember when you create a TMA, so if you're going to create a TMA and you're going to try and put it into that area, the area that you're actually going to use for Visium HD is only 6 millimeters. So if you cover that whole area, which is 1 centimeter by, what do they say, 2.3 centimeters? You're not going to cover that all on Visium HD. You're only going to take 6 millimeters of that area. Now, if your cores are 1 millimeter, which are rare, but 1 millimeter in diameter for your TMA, you might only be able to fit maybe 4 of those into that area, depending on how the spacing was done on the TMA. Because I don't design the TMAs. It's going to be someone else who designs it, but you can't have them too close either, because when you're doing tissue microarrays, you're going to ruin the block if they're too close together. But you don't want them too far apart, because who's going to want to look at a TMA when you have like 10 on this side and then 10 on that side? You want them spaced nice and evenly apart. But that's the problem that you're going to run into when you're using Visium HD. And on top of that, of course, your tissues. You don't know what's in the TMA block. So if there's possibility of it lifting, yeah, you're going to lose your data. So that's another issue that you're going to face. So I'm just going to touch on frozens. This is not done very often, but people do actually still do it. So here's your freezing fresh tissue. There's 2 ways to do it. I'm going to talk about fresh. Fresh meaning it's coming straight out of the mouse, or you got it from the OR and you're going to freeze it. I only recommend for myself A. B is actually used for muscle biopsies. So if you're using muscle biopsies, you can use the B. But the one at the bottom, I actually don't recommend that one, only because you're going to freeze the tissue first, then you're going to put it in OCT, and OCT is at room temperature, so it'll melt the sides a little bit of your frozen tissue. You want to actually freeze your tissue in one shot. So I go with A. So how do we achieve that? You're basically going to make a liquid nitrogen bath. So you're going to make liquid nitrogen in a nice big beaker. Then you're going to get a smaller beaker and you're going to put isopentane in there. And you're going to take that smaller beaker and put it in the liquid nitrogen. And you're going to allow the isopentane to freeze. Not freeze, but come down in temperature. Preferably anywhere between -75 to -95. That's optimal for freezing. The faster the freezing, the less ice crystals you get. So not the slower. People's like, no, we can freeze it with ethanol. Too slow. You need it really fast. So isopentane in this method actually works very well. And this is actually, I think, also in 10x Genomics. They have this in their guidelines. If you go to 10x Genomics in their support area, it tells you actually how they prepare the tissues. It's actually very, very good. So I recommend, if you're going to freeze, use A. So once you've frozen your tissue, you're just going to wrap this in foil, make sure they're sealed on all sides before you put it into the -80. So that's key. And then it can stay there for some time. Now, once you're ready to cut, so right there is a picture of it looks like a microtome, but it's a cryostat. It's actually inside a -20 cabinet. So picture the microtome in a -20 cabinet. And these will only cut section by section. It will not cut a ribbon. So you can only cut one section at a time. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to take your slides, your charged slides. You're going to put them in the -20 and let them come down to temperature. You're also going to put a slide mailer in there at -20. Everything has to be at -20. Then you're going to take out your block that you froze previously. You're going to let that come up to temperature -20. And then you're going to section. Once you've sectioned it and put it on the slide, it immediately goes into that slide mailer, seal it up with a desiccant, and into -80. And I'm pretty sure it lasts, is it a month, Amina? 2 months. Oh, okay. When I started, it was 1 month. Okay, well, that's pretty good. So 1 month in the freezer. So that's it for my presentation on histology. That's my contact information if ever you need to contact me. I'm at Mount Sinai. Also, I can answer in Slack. I'm just a little slower with Slack because it's fairly new to me. So I'm not used to seeing it. And sometimes I miss the little notification and like, oh, someone's asking questions. So you can definitely reach me by email. That's not a problem. Any questions?